So we'll get started on today's session. So we're here to finalize or hopefully finalize our review of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in our series of Distilling Wisdom from Books. And as we create our ideal lives, learning the lessons of the masters and mistresses, I suppose I should say, female masters, I don't know. What's the correct terminology there?
I'd just go with master.
Okay, thank you. As one who is often politically incorrect in my statements, mistresses could have a different connotation, couldn't it? So let's say masters.
Got a few.
Masters and female masters. Okay, so the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Without doing a full review of the rest of the book, because you guys have been with me most of the way here on this one, I don't think we need to, do we? Or do you want me to? Oh, we can. No, good. Okay, so we can go on to habit 7, sharpen the saw, because that'll leave us a bit of time then for discussing the rest of the book if we have anything we want to say about it overall. So habit 7, sharpen, or part 4 of the book, which is called renewal, and habit 7 is where we're what he calls sharpen the saw, principles of balanced self-renewal. So it really underlines the point in this chapter that it's important to take care of yourself. You are the #1 asset in your business. You're the driving force of it, aren't you, if you have a business? And if you just have a life and you don't have a business, you're still the #1 driving force in your life. So it's important to look after yourself, because you know, your body and your mind is all you've got. You don't get given another one. Well, not unless you're bionic or something. Well, not at this stage in our evolution. In some sci-fi movies, you know, you can have your consciousness upgraded or uploaded into a computer, or you might have your brain put into a robot or something. I don't know. But at this stage of medical science, you've only got one body, and so it's your responsibility to look after it, really, because it's the container of your soul, the transporter of your soul. So he starts with a little story about a guy chopping down, well, sawing a log, and the gentleman observes and says, "Why don't you take a break for a few minutes and sharpen the saw?" And he says, "I don't have time. I'm too busy sawing." Well, if you're too busy sawing to sharpen the saw, you're going to be carrying on with a blunt saw, and it's going to take you a hell of a lot longer to saw through that log than it would if you had a sharp saw. Principle being, of course, look after yourself, because if you don't refresh and renew yourself, take holidays, take a day off, take a break, have a nap, do something different. Have those little breaks. Those are what refreshes you and enables you to see things differently. As we were just talking about before the call started, Coralie and I, about emails, and sometimes before you send an email, it's a good idea to walk away and reread it before you send it, if it's a particularly important one, or maybe a controversial one. And I often get my partner or my wife Jo to read an email before I send it, just in case, because sometimes what you think you meant to say doesn't quite come across the way you meant. It sort of can be reread a different way. But that aside, he talks about 4 dimensions of renewal. So physical, social and emotional, spiritual and mental. And he says sharpening the saw basically means expressing all 4 motivations. It means exercising all 4 dimensions of our nature regularly and consistently in wise and balanced ways. And to do this, we must be proactive. Being proactive was the first habit, of course. So he says this is the single most powerful investment we can ever make in life. Investment in ourselves, in the only instrument we have with which to deal with life and to contribute. So what does he mean by that? Well, the physical dimension involves looking after your body, eating the right foods, getting exercise, resting, of course. The one that I let myself down on quite a bit sometimes. And I've just been reading a book about where it talks about this again. Arianna Huffington in Thrive talks about sleep deprivation and how most of the population is wandering around like a zombie because they haven't had enough sleep. No, I've certainly been guilty of that. Exercise. How many people do you hear say, I don't have time to exercise, I'm too busy? And if you don't exercise, and he says, we're not talking about spending every day in the gym for hours and hours. We're talking about maybe doing at least 30 minutes. He says every other day. I don't think it's that hard to find 30 minutes per day to do something physical, to especially if you've got a computer type job or a desk job, to get up and move around. They do say sitting is the new smoking. So if you're not moving around, we are designed to move. We're not designed to be sat on our backsides all day and looking at something that's that far away. It's not good for your eyes either, not good for your brain probably. And talking which, I do recommend getting I've just got some new blue filter glasses, so when I'm looking at the computer for a lengthy time, it's quite good for your eyes to protect them. Endurance. He talks about aerobic exercise, cardiovascular activity, building or using your muscles. That old saying, use it or lose it. Getting your heart rate up a few times a week is good for you and gets the blood pulsing through your veins. We all need our blood pulsing through our veins, don't we? Flexibility comes through stretching. Again, something I need to do a bit more of. I do at least play beach volleyball, indoor beach volleyball, a couple of times a week, so that helps me get moving that way. But exercise like simple stretching or yoga or Pilates or something like that, particularly as we start to get older, because it's very easy to start seizing up. I've noticed, I go to pick something up off the floor and make those strange groaning noises that old men make, when you pick something up off the floor, that I didn't used to make when I was a young man. So what's that all about? Flexibility then. So strength comes from muscle resistance exercises like calisthenics, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, working with weights. Apparently doing a plank every day is extremely good for you. So holding a plank. So we had a little competition a while back, my stepson and I, and how long we could hold a plank for each day. And the goal was to keep not competing with each other, but to keep beating your own time and stretching it out. And for some reason we stopped, so we've got to get back into doing that again. So it's a good idea to have a buddy, have somebody that you exercise with, and that makes you turn up and do it rather than, because you go, oh, I've got an excuse today, I can't do it because, the cat's not well or something like that, whatever the excuse is. Some lame excuse that we come up with. But you don't want to let somebody else down, so you tend to turn up and do it even if you don't feel up to it that day. Isn't that true? So there's quite a bit there about exercise. Then he goes on to the spiritual dimension. This is an often neglected area for a lot of people. And again, people say they're too busy or they're not religious. And there's a difference between being religious and nurturing your spirit. So even something like sitting in nature or, going for a walk or walking on the beach or walking in amongst the trees or the forest or doing something or listening to some music, meditating. So all those things. And he says, this is why I believe a personal mission statement is so important. Having a deep understanding of our center and our purpose, we can review and recommit to it frequently. In our daily spiritual renewal, we can visualize and live out the events of the day in harmony with those values. And that's when we can do our creative visualization as well. I quite like this quote here. It is a religious leader, David O. McKay, I've never heard of, taught, the greatest battles of life are fought out daily in the silent chambers of the soul. If you win the battles there, if you settle the issues that inwardly conflict, you feel a sense of peace, a sense of knowing what you're about. And you'll find that the public victories, where you tend to think cooperatively to promote the welfare and good of other people and to be genuinely happy for other people's successes, will follow naturally. So it makes you a better person, doesn't it? If you look after your spirit, then you tend to be more Zen-like. I don't know, more of a nice person. Do you disagree? No? Okay. The mental dimension. So things like wisdom in watching television, requiring effective self-management, discriminating and selecting the informing, inspiring, and entertaining programs which best serve and express your purpose and values, rather than being gormlessly sat in whatever drivel they put on TV in front of it, sat in front of it gormlessly going, I'll just watch this because I have no life. So that, of course, is different to choosing a Netflix drama or something that you really want to watch, and like Game of Thrones or something, and watching it through because it's entertaining and it's relaxing. So I suppose you're sharpening the saw in that sense. Maybe you're giving your brain a rest from the rigors of the day. But yeah, just be, I think, be a bit more selective, really, is what he's saying there. Education, continuing education, continually honing and expanding the mind is vital mental renewal. And there's that great saying there, the person who doesn't read is no better off than the person who can't read. So if you read good literature, read things that are going to educate and inform you, that are going to develop you. Writing is another powerful way to sharpen the mental saw. Keeping a journal of our thoughts, experiences, insights, and learnings promotes mental clarity, exactness, and context. Again, this is something that all of the masters mention. You know, Jim Rohn, Stephen Covey, various other ones that we've covered, Seth Godin, Tony Robbins. All these people talk about the importance of journaling and reflecting. Self-reflection really is, and writing enables you to sort of clear things out of your mind and just write down what you think or feel, what's going on. And it's quite a useful thing to look back on too. It's quite interesting having a journal to go and think, what was I thinking about a year ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago? And the worst is when you find that you've got goals that you had back then that you still haven't done anything about. That's a bit of a wake-up call. Sharpening the saw in the first 3 dimensions, the physical, the spiritual, and the mental, is a practice I call the daily private victory. So remember, we're starting from the inside out. We're starting with the private victory is what's going on in between your own ears and in your own heart and your own soul. Being the best version of yourself that you can, which I know that's one of Julie's pet hates. That Julia sometimes joins us on the calls. She hated that expression, but I think it's important to try to keep on. You're not competing with anybody else. You're just trying to be a better person than you were yesterday in some way, in whatever ways you determine are important to you to improve upon. So then we come to the social emotional dimension. So it says, while the physical, spiritual, and mental dimensions are closely related to habits 1, 2, and 3, centered on the principles of personal vision, leadership, and management, the social or emotional dimension focuses on habits 4, 5, and 6, centered on the principles of interpersonal leadership, empathic communication, and creative cooperation. So this is where, by nurturing our social abilities and our emotional quotient, our EQ, our ability to listen and understand people, to ask questions, to not try and just assert our own viewpoint, but to explore other ways of looking at things. He says success in habits 4, 5, and 6 is not primarily a matter of intellect. It's primarily a matter of emotion. It's highly related to our sense of personal security. If our personal security comes from sources within ourselves, then we have the strength to practice the habits of public victory. What do you think of that? Any comments so far? No? Okay. Where does intrinsic security come from then? It comes from within. It comes from accurate paradigms and correct principles deep in our own mind and heart. It comes from an inside-out congruence, from living a life of integrity in which our daily habits reflect our deepest values. Peace of mind comes when your life is in harmony with true principles and values, and in no other way. So if you've got internal conflict going on, it's hard to be as effective, and we're talking about, this whole book is about being more effective. It's hard to be effective if there's inner turmoil going on inside yourself. It's hard to be effective in your cooperation and collaboration with other people if you're not really feeling good in yourself. Not impossible, because you can mask it and you can try and get on with it anyway, but it's certainly a lot easier if you feel happier within yourself, which you tend to do if you're operating in accordance with your principles and values. The late Dr. Hans Selye, I think that's how it's pronounced, in his monumental research on stress, basically says that a long, healthy, and happy life is the result of making contributions, of having meaningful projects that are personally exciting and contribute to and bless the lives of others. His ethic was earn thy neighbor's love. Interesting, isn't it? And George Bernard Shaw went on to say that his life belongs to the whole community. And as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for that community whatever I can. There's people, I've heard of George Bernard Shaw, but N. Eldon Tanner, I have to confess I haven't heard of. Service is the rent we pay for the privilege of living on this earth. And that's where we do that by making deposits of unconditional love. So being kind, doing nice things for people, helping your community in whatever way you can. These are the things that actually bring true inner happiness, really, on a long-term basis. Talks about scripting, how we tend to we can give people things to live up to. So saying something nice about somebody, or giving them a compliment, not an inauthentic or disgenuine compliment, but giving them something that they have the potential to do more of or to get better at, and giving them therefore something to live up to a standard that they might not have even realized that they were good at something, or that they shone in a particular area. We all like to be complimented, don't we? We don't like to be criticized, or we do, which is a misused word sometimes, because criticism can be good or bad. But we tend to get defensive if people say some things that we don't like about ourselves, we don't agree with about ourselves, and then we try and defend our position. But if somebody gives us something nice to live up to, then we tend to lift our game a little bit more. Goethe said, treat a man as he is and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he will become as he can and should be. So certainly in leadership and management of people, it's good to help your staff, your employees, or your co-workers, your friends, to grow if you can, by treating them as if they were already better than they are. And they will live up to it, in theory and in hope. But it does tend to happen, from what I've seen. Organizational as well as individual effectiveness requires development and renewal of all four dimensions in a wise and balanced way. And there's a synergy in renewal, he goes on to say. As you improve in one dimension, you increase your ability in other dimensions as well. So each daily private victory makes a deposit in your personal intrinsic security account. I've always felt if you set yourself a challenging goal and you achieve it, you feel like, now I can do other things as well. If I can do that and I didn't think I could do it, imagine what else I could do that I've been, stopping myself from doing. And one of the great examples of that was I did a parachute jump, and for me, I got a pilot's license when I was 19. So the thought of jumping out of a perfectly serviceable aircraft, as they say, was, why would I do that? I can fly the thing, land it. So, which was the very thought going through my brain as I was hanging off the wing strut of this aircraft, about to let go. And every sinew in my body was saying, hang on to this aircraft as long as you possibly can, you idiot. Why aren't you back in there flying it? And then I let go. But having done the parachute jump, and especially as I had a line twist, which was interesting, I had to sort that out. My chute didn't open properly, so then you've got 10 seconds to decide if that's going to work, or you've got to jettison that and open the second chute. But I managed to sort it out. But the feeling of euphoria of achieving that when I landed on the ground was like, now I've done something that I never thought that I would go and do. So what else could I do? And I remember seeing the great Alan Pease on stage, who's the behavioral body language expert guy. He used to be in insurance sales. He's written several books about body language, and he said on stage that he sets himself a huge goal every year, one that scares him. And that particular year that I heard him on stage, he'd set himself the goal of learning how to milk a poisonous snake. So hold the snake and milk the poison out of its mouth. And he learned how to do that, which scared him because he was terrified of snakes. So doing something that you didn't think you could do and conquering that fear is a great way of then going, you know what, if I can do that, I can do anything I set my mind to. So interesting thought. Anyway, have you ever had any experience like that?
Not that extreme, no.
So you won't be milking any snakes this week.
No.
All right. But the principle of refreshing or renewing yourself, the daily private victory, is a minimum of 1 hour a day and renewal of the physical, spiritual, and mental dimensions. That is the key to the development of the 7 habits, and it's completely within your circle of influence. If you think about these 7 habits that he's mentioned, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, put first things first. Those are the private victories. And then the public victory, which is about cooperating with other people. Think win-win. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, and synergize. And sharpen the saw is the renewal habit. So all of those habits are within your circle of influence to improve, to develop, and to do the best you can. So that's very inspirational in a way, to know that it's really in your hands. You're not sitting around waiting for someone else to give you permission to be better at understanding people, or working on your own personal renewal, or communication skills, or personal development through reading, that sort of thing. Excuse me. So yeah, it's all within your circle of influence. It's not outside of your control. So conscience is the endowment that senses our congruence or disparity with correct principles and lifts us towards them when it's in shape. And how do we keep it in shape? Well, the upward spiral, as he calls it, regular feasting on inspiring literature, thinking noble thoughts, and above all, living in harmony with this small voice of conscience. I love this. This was quite interesting about the junk food, lack of exercise, obscene stuff, dark stuff can cause the higher sensibilities of, will I be found out? What is right and what is wrong? And this, the words of Dag Hammarskjöld. I don't know. I only know it's pronounced Hammarskjöld because I had a clover shield that worked for me. So it was a Swedish name. I don't know who this Dag Hammarskjöld is, but he said, you cannot play with the animal in you without becoming wholly animal. Play with falsehood without forfeiting your right to truth. Play with cruelty without losing your sensitivity of mind. He who wants to keep his garden tidy doesn't reserve a plot for weeds. That's a good quote, isn't it? Do you know what? I didn't highlight that, and I'm going to. That was a good, very good quote. So protecting your mind. In other words, there's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you just watch rubbish television that's served up to you, or don't bother reading when you can, or don't hang out with people who inspire and uplift you, and instead you hang out with people who have no real goals or not really going anywhere, it will rub off on you. All those things will affect you, and they are all within your own power to choose. So moving along the upward spiral requires us to learn, commit, and do on increasingly higher planes. To keep progressing, we must learn, commit, and do, learn, commit, and do, learn, commit, and do again. And you've seen people, I'm sure, in life that go on a negative spiral and fall into bad habits, bad company, start taking drugs, excessive use of alcohol or other things, and they go on a downward spiral. You see them literally kind of fade away from someone who was functioning effectively to someone who their life just falls apart. And so going on a negative spiral, it's like as you go down, you can go down faster. It seems to accelerate the negative spiral. But the same is true going up. If you start doing the work, if you start applying all these habits that he's talked about in this book, you can uplift yourself and go on an upward spiral. And emotionally, we quite often move between the two. We might, have a spell of going downwards, not feeling good, and then either we snap ourselves out of it, or hopefully we've got a partner or a family member or a good friend that can sense that and can pick you up when you need it most, give you some encouraging words, or take you out to do something different, to change your mood, to change your whole outlook on things, and your perspective shifts, and then you can start climbing back up again. And that's something we can do for other people. So important, like this community aspect of, being of service, contributing, is so important to our well-being as well. You feel much better when you've helped other people, don't you? So that concludes that chapter on Sharpen the Saw. Did anything jump out at you from that chapter, or any thoughts that you had that resonated for some particular reason?
I'm back.
He's back. Stan's back. Yeah, Stan, anything that leapt out at you from that Sharpen the Saw chapter, or anything that we've covered so far? While you're both thinking about that, there's one sort of bonus chapter, if you like, and it's called Inside Out Again. So we'll just touch on that, and then we can conclude with our thoughts overall on the book and what we've got from it. And he says, I would like to share with you a personal story which I feel contains the essence of this book. And he talked about going on a sabbatical with his wife and taking a leave from the university where he taught so he could write. And he and his wife started going off and finding a nice place to have a picnic and chat. And they talked and talked, probably like they hadn't done since they first met. When you first meet somebody, you tend to talk a lot with them. You could find you could talk with them all day and all night. And then, by the time you've been married for 20 years or something, you grunt at each other in the hallway as you go past. What do they call it? Hallway sex, don't they? Anyway, so he does this renewal, I suppose, with his wife by spending time with her and just chatting and discussing what's affected their lives, and what's important, and what has made them who they are, I suppose. So it got quite deep. And by doing that, by having that time, he said it was truly synergistic. And they were learning things about themselves just by having I suppose, somebody listening to them and being able to talk through what their thoughts and feelings were about their life so far and their childhood and their upbringing and things that had affected them. And anyway, he says, we feel the key to staying in love is to talk, particularly about feelings. We try to communicate with each other several times every day, even when I'm traveling. It's like touching into home base, which accesses all the happiness, security, and values it represents. Thomas Wolfe was wrong. You can go home again if your home is a treasured relationship, a precious companionship. Isn't that nice? Nice, isn't it? When we began to work from the inside out, we were able to build a relationship of trust and openness and to resolve dysfunctional differences in a deep and lasting way that never could have come by working from the outside in. So how many times do you hear of people getting married and they break up and then it's commented on that she thought she could change him or he thought he could change her into who they wanted that person to be. So in a way, that's kind of sounds like it's conflicting with the previous chapter where it's saying give people something to live up to. But I think there's a difference in helping people to grow and being critical of someone and taking them as they're not perfect and I'm going to mold them into what they should be, that I think they should be.
Mm.
I think there's a difference between those two.
Yeah. Everyone's ex is crazy, aren't they?
Yeah. That's a great quote, Coralie. Love it. Yeah, that's but I wonder what they would say about us. There you go.
Same, probably.
I thought this was interesting too. There is transcendent power in a strong intergenerational family, an effectively interdependent family of children, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins can be a powerful force in helping people have a sense of who they are and where they came from and what they stand for. So generational values and principles that can be passed down, which is more easily affected with a strong family unit. And this is often attributed as one of the causes of dysfunction in our societies today is the breakdown of the family structure. And add to that the breakdown of any sort of, for want of a better word, religious guidance, but, you know, spiritual guidance, really. People are left to fend for themselves, whereas in the past they would have had somebody, whether it's a priest or whatever denomination you are, somebody would be, you know, preaching sermons of some form to get you to think about things and become a better person. If you don't have exposure to that reflection, you're reliant on Hollywood movies and TV dramas to try and instill principles into people, which isn't always the best source of material, is it?
Mm.
It's great for children to be able to identify themselves with the tribe, to feel that many people know them and care about them, even though they're spread all over the country. So when I read that, that certainly made me think about that, you know, about the importance of family and keeping in contact. Because these days, it's so easy not to. It's easy to, but it's also easy not to, because we all get so busy, and you know, we can lose contact quite easily. So he says, becoming a transition person. Among other things, I believe that giving wings to our children and to others means empowering them with the freedom to rise above negative scripting that had been passed down to us. So there is that quite often family dynamics of misunderstandings or guilt or negative emotions that are passed down from one generation to another. And by recognizing that you can stop that A tendency that's run through your family for generations can stop with you. You're a transition person, a link between the past and the future, and your own change can affect many, many lives downstream.
Mm.
So if you choose to look at things differently, so for instance, you've been abused as a child, statistics show that that's where a lot of child abuse comes from, people who have themselves been abused.
Mm.
And they continue and think that's the right way to behave. But if somebody goes, no, that's not right, I'm going to change that in my family. And my parents both had pretty rough upbringings, and they said, no way are my children going to have that kind of rough upbringing in one way or another, you know, just dysfunctional. Like my father had his parents were always arguing and splitting up and getting back together again, and splitting up and getting back together again, which creates quite a bit of insecurity for a child. And so he was like, doesn't matter what happens, we're staying together. And they stayed married for 70 years. So, and he said, you know, not that everything went like rosily smoothly all the time, but my mother's great quote was that we never went to bed on an argument. We would talk things through until we worked things out. So they still argued like anybody else. They still had their disagreements and differences of opinion, but they worked it out. And so that's, again, is one of those things that's within your center of influence to do. Obviously, building a character of total integrity and living the life of love and service that creates such unity isn't easy. It isn't quick fix, but it's possible. It begins with the desire to center our lives on correct principles, to break out of the paradigms created by other centers and the comfort zones of unworthy habits. That's a great quote, isn't it? The comfort zones of unworthy habits. Again, I quote Emerson, that which we persist in doing becomes easier. Not that the nature of the task has changed, but our ability to do it has increased. And in a personal note at the end, he says, in the words of Teilhard de Chardin, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, which I actually thought was a Wayne Dyer quote, but he obviously went further back than that.
Mm. I've found that quite a bit lately, these quotes that I thought were Wayne Dyer that are older.
Well, that's another thing. I don't think that people intentionally steal quotes, but I think we read things and we absorb them into our own way of looking at things.
And yeah, and if he's the one you heard say it, doesn't mean that he made it up. It just means.
Well, you just heard me say it, so you can say I'll quote Tony Inman, who said,
Tony Inman.
and right at the back, there's this thing about what Franklin Covey is all about, this organization that he founded, and mentions Lao Tzu's timeless adage, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So that's the principle of their education training that they do now. Even though Stephen has passed on, the Covey Leadership Center continues as his legacy. And this is what this book is all about, really. Teaching us how to fish rather than giving us a fish. It's teaching us how to be more effective in life and in business and in leadership and in management, but in our personal lives, in our interrelations with people, in our collaborations. Well, there you have it. It's taken us quite a few weeks to get through, fairly chunky book and a lot to discuss. What was your overall perspective on this book? Overall thoughts, habits of highly effective people. Coralie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I quite enjoyed it. It had more humor in it than I thought it would, so that was nice.
Yes, because the older books can be a bit dry sometimes, can't they?
Yes,
Think back to Napoleon Hill, for instance. It can be a bit hard reading to start with, and then you get into that sort of rhythm of how it's written.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Stephen Covey. I think he comes across well, and certainly, I mean, this wasn't just something he threw together. It's taken him years of research to develop these theories, I suppose, and and to be able to put it into words and get it out into printed form, no small undertaking.
No.
And it was first printed in July 1990. So when you think back, as we said in one of the earlier sessions, the internet wasn't really a thing then. Social media wasn't really around. And the principles that are contained in this book are really just as relevant today, probably more relevant in lots of ways, like the seek first to understand and then be understood. So relevant in our world of miscommunication, of text messaging and abbreviations and slang and emails that people send that they don't really you think, what do they mean by that, you know? Because say an email has no tone or a text message has no tone, but it certainly does, doesn't it? You can, because you interpret it based on how you're filtering it. You know, what did he mean by that? Why is he criticizing me about that? It might not be at all.
Yeah. Oh, yes, everyone has different opinions on it. Like, I like using emojis because then, you know, you sort of go, see, I'm smiling. It's okay. But not everyone likes
emojis.
What's that?
I'm a big believer in emojis for that reason as well.
Yeah.
It creates a good mood, doesn't it?
I think so, but not everyone thinks that. Not everyone
unless somebody sees it as a sarcastic smile. Or, you know, I'm going to stab you in the back here, but I'm going to do it with a smiling face.
That's what I think about kind regards.
Oh, right. Okay. But no, I put warm regards, actually. I know that kind regards always sounds a bit, warm
Yeah.
sounds a bit more. I'm attempting to be more connected.
If I ever start regarding, things are pretty serious. Usually very not a funny thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Dan, are you still with us? Do you have anything to add? What sort of stood out for you the most out of this book, do you think?
Well, I actually like the title of the last one, Sharpen the Saw. It's sort of, it says a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, just, yeah, get everything in line.
Yeah, absolutely. I find I really need my holidays. I need those breaks and that's when I'm most creative. And typically that's when I come back and start a new business, or I try and buy a business when I'm on holiday or something like that. You know, that's been my track record, because I get into that creative zone and I start seeing opportunities and possibilities, and my entrepreneurial side goes nuts, you know, because I've had that break from the day-to-day grind. I just want to do more and set up more things and improve stuff. And yeah, I'll definitely come back with a whole different perspective when I've had a break.
Yeah.
Gets me into trouble sometimes, that. Oh, that's another story for another day. Lots of different nearly businesses I've nearly had. But some that I have improved because of being on holiday and having the chance. I remember before I set up my backpackers hostel business that I had for 14 years, I went traveling and I basically lived the backpacker experience and traveled from Perth all the way up to Darwin and then across to Townsville and up to Cairns. So all the way, I went to the local hostels and I had a chat with the manager or the owner, and I picked their brains, and I like, you know, what issues did you have when you were setting up your business, and what problems have you had and how have you overcome them? And I found that so many of them were quite happy to open up and tell me some really useful information, because I wasn't a competitor down the road to them. You know, I was potentially saying, well, I could, once I get my business up and running, I can send people to you. Maybe you could refer people back to me. So there was a possibility of collaboration down the track. But I found just by being warm and upfront and open with people, they started being warm and open with me, and I got loads of useful information and some great ideas. So when I came back to Perth and was able to start my business, I was immediately able to incorporate a lot of these concepts or systems into how I was going to run things. So it's it was definitely a case of not only sharpening the saw, but also seeking first to understand and then be understood, and win-win, thinking collaboration. So there really are great principles, these 7 habits.
Yeah.
Definitely starting from the inside out. Something I've always felt as a manager or a leader is when things don't go well, particularly communications with staff, with employees, if something's not quite worked out or they've misunderstood what you said, and I think, hang on a minute, what could I have done differently? How did I handle that, or how could I have handled it better, or what did I do wrong in my communication? So I always look to myself first before I look at what they've done wrong. I think, hang on, well, this isn't worked out right, or they've done the wrong thing here. Why has that happened? Could I have done something differently to prevent that? And that's where you find, if you have that attitude of constantly wanting to improve, you'll keep tweaking your systems and your ideas and your ways of communicating and your methods of double checking that people are on the same page as you. They've understood what you thought they understood. And, you know, one simple one is to go, could you just repeat back to me what I asked you to do? You know, good one to use. And it's very similar to when you're working with your children, isn't it? Employees can be like children sometimes in that sense, in the relationship. It's no, that's not what I asked you to do. What I said was this, and you can clarify then, because you say one thing and they hear something different because they hear what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Go tidy your room could be, I thought you said I could go into my room and watch TV.
Yeah.
As one little example.
Yeah. Well, there's also expectations, isn't there? And like tidy your room. How tidy is a tidy room?
Definitely, really good point, Coralie. Yeah, that's one of the key things that happens in relationship breakdowns as well, whether it's employee and boss or partners and marriage partners, is what are my expectations of myself and my partner or the other person involved, particularly with staff. You know, well, I didn't think that was my job. I thought that was somebody else's job. And you know, I didn't. Did I give them a clear job description of what I expect from them? So they've got something that they know that that's the standard, that's what they live up to. And very often the conflicts that happen, particularly in the workplace, are a result of people not being on the same page, not having the same expectation about what the work is that's required to be done and what the outcome is that's to be achieved. So that's a really good point. Very, very, very key point in successful leadership and successful management is clarifying roles, responsibilities, and expectations. And even with parenting, effective parenting is setting standards, isn't it? All the time as a parent, and kids will test you. You know, they'll divide and conquer as well. They'll go, you know, dad will let me get away with this, but mum won't, or vice versa.
But mum said I could.
Exactly. All right. Well, any other thoughts? We're at time, so we've gone right through the book, and I think we've covered it pretty well, and you know, certainly to an in-depth level. I personally think that this book is still as valid today as it was when it was written, that these principles are timeless in a sense. And yeah, I think it's a book you can go back to many times and refresh yourself and you know, revisit those habits and think, am I living in accordance with those habits? Because they are within your circle of control, your circle of influence. All right. Well, thank you for being with me on the journey through Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we're going to move on next week to Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. So we'll be starting our review of that book. And I'm a big fan of Brene Brown's. I've got a few of her books now, and it follows on quite well from what we've just been covering, actually, because it's how have the courage to be vulnerable transforms the way we live, love, parent, and lead. And there's an endorsement right on the front here by Sir Ken Robinson, author of The Element. If you want to live more fully, just read this book. Who doesn't want to live more fully? All right. So we're bursting with knowledge. We're growing and learning with every session, and applying all these great principles of these great masters, male and female, as we adopt them in our daily lives. So well done, everyone, and I hope to see you next week on the same time, same call. We'll clarify that difference if there is a time zone change in the US, and we may have lost a couple of our people because of that. We'll figure that one out. Make sure we're all on the same page, seeking first to understand and be understood.
Yes.
Okay. Have an awesome week.
You.
All right. Bye, Stan.